Hello, everyone, and welcome to this episode of Shit I Make My Family Watch podcast, where I make my family and friends watch crappy horror and sci-fi movies so you don't have to. I'm your fill-in host, Dev Solovey, and joining me today is Carina Stopenski. How you doing?
I'm doing great. Happy to be here to talk about some shit movies.
Yeah, a particular shit-ass movie. So together we're going to break down the storyline of this piece of garbage as best we can and rate these movies on a scale from 1 to 5, 5 being only a little bit bad, or no, excuse me, 1 being only a little bit bad, 5 being the worst atrocity ever committed. And today's atrocity, I'm not going to bury the lead. I hate this movie, but it's Death Note 2017.
Yeah.
How was your watching experience this time around? How was it?
Well, as a diehard, longtime Death Note fan, I try to steer away from any sort of rewatch of that particular film. But watching this again, 7 years after it came out, and I had watched it freshly, I do not recall it being this bad. Maybe it was just the hubbub of being a college student, super stoked for a Netflix original.
Back when that used to be shorthand for something being good. Whenever Netflix announced something, it was guaranteed to be good, and then this happened. Sorry, continue.
Yeah, watching it alone in my apartment as an adult human nearing 30, I was like, wow, okay, this is a very different experience than I remember.
Yeah.
Took me, I had a couple pauses that I needed to have in it, just being
oh, me too, yeah.
I was like, I just can't, I have to take a break to walk around. And I have a broken leg right now, too. So the struggle, that I need to walk around while watching this film.
Yeah, no, that my watching experience was actually somewhat similar. I started out a week ago trying to watch it on my own, and I had to pause frequently just to stop cringing. It was it went beyond just and a fucking black hole of cringe just opened up in my gut and sucking me inwards. It was awful. It took me 2 hours to get through the first 50 minutes of the movie. And then at that point, I was just I need to go to bed. I can't take this anymore. And I gave up halfway through. And so I decided it would probably be better if I watched it with a friend, as you did with your college friends, right, 7 years ago. And that made it a lot more tolerable because then I had somewhat a bouncing board to yell about all of the things I hate about this movie. Yeah. I watched it with Victor again, who frequent listeners will remember I mentioned on the Shark Side of the Moon episode, and they had never had any experience with any Death Note media of any kind before coming into this movie, and I had to apologize profusely.
Yeah, poor sweet summer child. Oh, that is not what you want your first taste of the universe to be.
Yeah, especially because this particular movie isn't just a bad adaptation because it throws the canon out the window. It's a bad adaptation because you get the sense the person who wrote it was actively trying to do the exact opposite of what the original story did. Specifically just being I'm an edgelord and I'm gonna subvert expectations by just doing the opposite. That's how subversion works, right? Total bullshit.
Yeah, definitely thinking about so our listeners know, I am actually an anime and manga scholar as well as a horror scholar. So I have done a lot with particularly with Death Note and shonen crime manga in my academic research. And the thing about the original source material of Death Note is the tension and the suspense. And the way that Light, our protagonist, becomes Kira, this death god who gets the Death Note from Ryuk, the Shinigami, the god of death.
Yeah.
It is about obtaining justice. And the first, deaths that he's trying, it is just a try. But he's not consumed with this omnipotence that quickly. He sees it as a form of justice very early on, and it's a slow build. It's definitely a slow burn.
Yeah.
But in this film adaptation, making it immediately be I'm gonna avenge my mom's death when in the manga, his mom's very much alive.
Well, I think the choice to do that was, it's exact opposite. They took a story which has one of the greatest corruption arcs of all time and turned it into a teen coming of age movie, which is stupid because, like, I may not be a manga scholar, but I was like a mega fan of Death Note for a long time. To this day, and I'm talking about the manga when I talk about the good version of it. To this day, I will die on this hill. I believe Light Yagami is to corruption arcs as Zuko is to redemption arcs.
100%.
Yeah, absolutely. And it starts out, and he's kind of this idealistic teenager who has some flawed ideas about how to improve the world due to some kind of unchecked privilege. And so he thinks like just killing criminals will clean the world up. And he does this using the Death Note, which kind of falls out of the sky. It's dropped by a death god. You write somebody's name in it, and it kills them. And you can specify conditions if you want or not. They'll just die of a heart attack if so. So that's kind of the premise. And then over the course of the story, he becomes the very thing he swore to kill. By the end of it, he's the worst mass murderer in history. And so that's kind of the gist of Death Note. And we're going to get into some of the primary characters and how they got completely butchered as we talk about this movie. Which I think one of the sources of all the problems is the fact that they took the fact that Light is a villain protagonist, and that being like the primary element of his character, and removed it and made him not a villain. And that kind of destroyed the purpose of every other character. Ryuk is usually more of an audience stand-in in the original story, but he becomes more like kind of evil. Misa becomes a little more evil. They changed her name to an English name, but I'm not going to say it because it's stupid. And they had to like make L of all people a villain, which is like the worst possible choice. I'll talk about how much they butchered L once we get to the part where he shows up. But I mean, do you have any thoughts before we synopsize this?
So I will start by saying that it's such a shame because they had some phenomenal actors. They were working with fantastic chops. And it's like the Riverdale School of Acting is what I like to call it. When you have people that are just trying their best with a horrific script. And the actors are like well-known folks. They're like really, really established in their field. They're working with this shit-ass script and adaptation that just makes it even more ridiculous because they're playing it totally straight. They're not playing it in a satirical way whatsoever. They're playing it very serious. And it just adds to the absurdity of all of it.
Yeah, I feel really bad for the cast. Nat Wolff in particular, this movie like destroyed his career. He hasn't really done anything since. The guy who plays L is fantastic. I think he did it as best he could with this script because like the few times, I think there was like twice when this movie got any emotional response out of me, it was always from him. So I really do think he was doing his best with a character that had every element of the character stripped from it. But
for sure.
Speaking of the script, I do have to tell my juicy story. Which I've been alluding to for a while. So I, like you, was very into Death Note in high school. I was like really, really autistic about it. Like as an autism person, that was my special interest. So like I remember like scrolling around on, it was 2009 and I'm scrolling around on like DeviantArt or whatever I used to do back then.
As we all did.
Yeah. And so I hear whispers, some kind of rumor of a live action Death Note movie. And people were talking about fan casts. Everybody was saying Willem Dafoe would be a great cast for Ryuk, which he is, right? But the rumors were mixed. And then I get to seeing some rumors of a leaked script. And the context that are giving on these forum posts about it, they're saying it was written by the guy who did those awful Fantastic Four movies. And, people were saying some 2009 shit like, oh, they're going to get Zac Efron to play Light Yagami, which in hindsight, I wish they had. But, or like Miley Cyrus is going to play Mesa or whatever. So I see this and I kind of think it's dumb, but I open up the script and the script was so stupid, so profoundly stupid that I thought it was fake. Like I thought it was trolling, right? Flash forward 8 years to 2017. And I see the trailer for this movie, and I recognize elements of it, particularly the name Light Turner. And I'm like, wait a minute, hold up. Is this that script that wasn't even good enough for 2009 that got turned down by every studio in 2009? There's no way. And I ended up watching it when it came out with my friend Joan. And the first couple of minutes were that script that I read all those years ago. And I felt like everything in my life had led me to that moment. Like, I just felt it was so surreal. This thing that I was convinced was so stupid it couldn't be real got picked up by Netflix during a period of time when like that was, Netflix original was like guaranteed quality. So it was so I felt like I had just kind of like fallen out of reality for a second, and then the terrible quality of this movie did not make it better.
Gosh. Yeah, like thinking about that, like I was like also on DeviantArt and I never read the script, but I remember mumblings in some of like the Death Note centered groups because I was also profoundly autistic about it as a youth, reading my dojin and everything.
Right, yeah.
But like I believed it was like fake. I was like, this, like, I didn't want to read it because I was like, this is just somebody just trying to goof on us. Like,
yeah.
I'm not going to touch it because it's probably a prank. But now hearing that, just changes things.
Yeah, so it's just like a script so bad they wouldn't even make it 2009.
Yeah,
they made it in 2017 with barely any revision, by the way. they didn't update it for 2017, which is why this thing feels like a period piece from the 2000s, because for all intents and purposes it is. They all have like flip phones and paper files at the police station and whatnot. Light has frosted tips.
Yes, yeah, like the hairstyle is not it, and I don't know if they're just trying to pay like homage to like Death Note, like originally like take place like early 2000s, and like because the original like manga arc is like it's covering a decade of time, but we only see Light for what, like 2 months over the course of this. So are we just captured in like a 2002 time capsule during this experience? Unclear.
Yeah, so we might as well jump into a synopsis. Do you want to take the front half of the movie, or do you want to take the back half?
I can take the back half. I think that I'll head up the end here.
All right, sounds good. Just so you know, I'm terrible at synopsizing. I will go on tangents. It's just
You're
how my brain
works. You're good. You're good.
The only thing I can be is myself, and myself is a rambler. So we start out, and this was the scene that I remember from the god-awful leaked script. It's like Light's on his high school campus or whatever, and there's like a cheer squad routine where you see Misa just like walk out in the middle of a cheer routine smoking a cigarette. I don't know. And there's some bullies just off in the distance or whatever. She tries to step in and protect this kid being bullied, and then the bully like shoves her or whatever and starts antagonizing her. And then so Light goes in and intervenes there, like 2 interventions at once, and says some weird bullshit, some weird rant at the bully that I can't remember, something about like assault or something, getting charged with assault. I don't know. And anyway, Light gets the shit kicked out of him, and he goes to the principal's office, and he's got like an ice pack on his head or something, and the principal's like, "We saw you doing other kids' homework. We found it in your backpack, and now you're in trouble." And he says, quite reasonably, "You're not going to think about the fact that I got punched." The principal of a school where one of your children was harmed. But yeah, they put him in detention, and this is, I think, around the time when he gets the Death Note, when it falls out of the sky, right? Or like it's just before the bullies, I think. I'm not sure.
Yeah, it's like right before, and like he has it. And it's like,
right, okay. It's so unmemorable that I forgot when it happened. But the Death Note, it's like they made it very gnarly looking. It's like leather bound, and all the pages are like, fraying and stuff like that. So he's in detention. I guess he falls asleep, and all of a sudden it's nighttime or something. And this is where we get possibly the funniest scene in any thriller ever. So I just want to talk about for a second, before we get into it, what it's like in the original manga when this happens. Because what's going to happen here is that Light is going to meet the Shinigami who originally owned the Death Note, the Shinigami being like a death god. And his name is Ryuk. And he's a very large sort of monster with like this spiky sort of, what are these called? Like, not gauntlets. Pauldrons?
Like,
pauldrons.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, and he's got this like big smile with sharp teeth and glowing red eyes, right? And so it very like spooky to see that all of a sudden, right? In the original manga, he kind of like freaks out for a second because he doesn't expect it, and he's like, "Oh, okay," and he like gains his composure and he says, "Actually, I was expecting you." And they have this kind of interesting back and forth where Ryuk outlines, some of the things about the Death Note. And it's interesting, right? The way this movie does it, is Light's in this detention room, and there's like noise in the background, and there's like a jar of marbles that shatters, and he's kind of like kicking them out of the way to go investigate the noise. And at last we see the silhouette of Ryuk, and he kind of like comes out of the darkness and his eyes are glowing, and Light shrieks like a toddler.
It's so absurd. It's just
listener, like I'm going to put a link to the scene in the description of this video so you can experience it, because like we can describe it in detail, but no amount of description will ever capture exactly how fucking funny this scene is.
Yeah, like I was watching this on 1.5 times speed, so I could just get it over with. But that scene, I had to rewind it and listen to it like in regular, and I was like, "Is it this high pitched? Listen on just plain speed?" And like the answer is yes. And it makes it even funnier.
God, I can't imagine watching it on 1.5 speed. That must be so fucking funny. But yeah, he shrieks. It's kind of like if you've seen that clip of the goat making the shrieking noise.
Yes.
Yeah, it's like that. And he like just stumbles away. He runs away. And he's tripping over stuff, and stuff's falling everywhere. And I think like Ryuk is coming up behind him or something, but we don't really see what Ryuk is doing. But Light's just like freaking out and throwing things and banging on the door and shrieking, and he turns around and Ryuk is there. He shrieks again, and
it's like almost campy. Like this is like high camp.
No, it's again really sucks that this is what destroyed Nat Wolff's career, because I know he's not a bad actor, but it was bad direction is what he was given. But he finally sort of regains his composure, and this is another weird thing, like problem with the script, where like right before this happened, when he was in detention, he was reading the rules of the Notebook out loud to himself, and then Ryuk comes in, and when Light finally gathers his composure, Ryuk basically just gives him like a video game tutorial on how to use the Death Note. Like just tells her like look out the window and there's that bully again. He's like, hey, you could do something about that. And Light kind of tries to sort of hedge his way out of it and say, I don't have a pen. And then Ryuk pulls out a modern ballpoint pen. Very funny considering the Death Note is like this ancient tome.
It's just like a relic, and then you got like a fucking Bic over here in the corner.
Yeah. A big pen with a little clicker.
Just a little clicker.
Yeah. And so he tells Light or suggests that he should write the name in the notebook, which why announce the rules when you're going to have a Shinigami teach it to us anyhow? It's just redundant. But yeah, so he writes the bully's name, and you can also specify the cause of death. So I think he specifies something like a traffic accident. And what ensues is the most like Final Destination sequence of events.
Horrific.
It's like one of them drops a basketball, and that it gets sort of they almost bump into a lady who's carrying groceries, and her groceries break out of her bag, and that like the basketball hits them and goes out further into the road, and you think, oh well, he's going to get hit by a car, right? Wrong. The basketball The guy goes after the basketball. The car sees the guy who's coming after it and swerves, hits another car, which has a ladder in the back of it, which then flies out and decapitates the bully. So it was this like Rube Goldberg machine type of chain of events.
I will give them credit for how thought out that process was. Because it is like an insanely like absurd chain reaction of events, considering that for our friends that aren't familiar with Death Note, the default cause of death, and you just write someone's name in Death Note, is just a heart attack. It's just a basic heart attack. So Light went out of his way for his first kill to write
he didn't. He just wrote traffic accident. All he wrote was decapitation. Oh wait, you're right. He did. Well. Yeah, you're right.
Like he's going out the gate with decapitation. So like we know that this is an edgelord here, because like just like somebody who's like practicing and trying something out is not going to say traffic accident ending in decapitation. They're going to just put the person's name in. And
you're
I think right there, okay, like this is a little fucker right here. Like this is not the Light Yagami that I know. This is somebody who is just trying to stir stuff up.
Yeah, he's just kind of an edgelord for no particular reason. And the other problem is, like, again, this is where I say that the scriptwriter was actively trying to do the opposite. Is in the original, Light has the Death Note for a couple of days before he meets Ryuk, and that's when he decides he wants to start killing criminals, because he has this idea of like building a better world that way. And so he comes to that conclusion on his own, right? And the reason he does so is because his character is the way it is. It makes sense he would come to that conclusion, him being a model student with kind of unchecked privilege and sort of a misanthrope. It makes sense. Here, Ryuk gives Light that idea. Originally, he just kind of doesn't know what to do with it and doesn't really care. He's just kind of like, oh, this is weird. Guess I'll pick it up. And so... like that's the exact opposite. Like originally Light figures it out on his own. Here Ryuk tells him what to do, which another thing that's very important to note in the original series, Ryuk says he's not going to intervene in any way. So he just says, he says like, I dropped it on Earth because I was bored and I wanted to see what would happen, but I'm not going to help you in any way. So for Ryuk to tell Light what to do with it breaks both the core element of Light's character and Ryuk's character.
Yes. They shifted Light from being this, like, his corruption arc of, like, lawful good to lawful evil. He's definitely chaotic to chaotic evil. Well, he's not even good. He's, like, kind of chaotic neutral at the beginning. Like, you know, he's not really helping anybody. But Ryuk is supposed to be, like, this true neutral character. He is, like, the spectator. He is the voyeur. And they've made Ryuk chaotic evil, which, like, completely takes away from Light having any sort of corruption arc, because it's like, oh, it's the influence of the Shinigami on his psyche.
Yeah, because they took away the corruption arc, like the core element again. So the fact that he's no longer, you know, a villain protagonist means that they have to have other villains. And this is where they butchered Ryuk, Misa, and L respectively. Because all three of those characters had to compensate for the fact that Light is no longer Light, pretty much. Mm-hmm. And the result was Ryuk being sort of evil and influencing events when he shouldn't. Misa, they like saw the misogyny in the original text and tried to swing in the opposite direction, but went so hard that they wrapped around to being misogynistic again. And then with L, he no longer served the narrative purpose that he had in the original. So he just sort of existed as a plot obstacle, and as a result had no consistent characterization whatsoever. And that's just kind of like, that's what happens from here on out. But yeah, so where are we? He kills the bully. He seems a little traumatized or whatever. And he goes home, and his dad is a widower. He says Light has this sort of fight with him about their mom and how she was run over by a mobster.
Yeah.
Who then paid his way.
Very specific cause of death.
I know. You know how like mobsters run people over with their cars?
Yeah.
Random bystanders.
Of course. I think like them choosing that too is like being like, oh, he has a vendetta against organized crime and criminals, but it's just like silly.
Yeah. It's kind of like because they removed the sort of villainous aspect, they had to give him a motivation for wanting to kill criminals. So the motivation they gave him was that a criminal who killed his mom got free, and so he hates the system. And that kind of comes up later in his weird monologue where he talks about like politicians and the police, they do nothing, which is also very clearly a reaction to his bad relationship with his dad, who is a police
Yeah,
detective of
he
some
is like
kind.
I don't know what they adapted him to like in like this film because they were never really specific of whether he was like a sergeant or like lieutenant, but like in the like manga, like his dad is like a top dog like in like the
Yeah.
Japanese police like system, like in working with like international crime. So they
Yeah.
never specified like how specific
Yeah,
how high up he is in this film adaptation.
yeah. All we know is that he's a part of the Seattle police department, which
Yeah.
is nothing compared to what originally Lightstad is. Lightstad, I believe, is the assistant director of the NPA, which is the Japanese version of the FBI.
Yeah.
So if they were to adapt that here, Lightstad would be the assistant director of the FBI, which is very different from a detective on Seattle PD. Which makes his teaming up with L that much weirder, by the way.
Yeah.
But yeah, so Light feels like his dad did nothing about this, even though there was nothing his dad could have done to control it. To be fair, the fight they have really does feel like a fight a teenager would have with their dad. Like,
Yeah.
again, they are good actors.
Yes.
Yeah, so that was like there was that scene. I also noticed that like the visual language surrounding his dad, there was like 5 cups of beer on the table. So like the visual language is saying he was an alcoholic, but like the fight that they had, I recall him being very reasonable and like
Yeah.
way more so than Light. And then also the alcohol is never brought up again.
Yeah. I kind of viewed that as this is a grieving man. Maybe he has like a beer after work, but he is just so bereft that he just doesn't clean up after himself. Is like how I was reading it. Like Light
Yeah.
hates his dad because his dad is still sad about his mom passing too. And Light's
Yeah.
like, no, I'm the only one who can be sad about my mommy dying. You don't talk about my mommy.
Yeah, exactly. And I think it's after that fight that he goes up to his room and in a rage he kind of pulls a newspaper clipping of the guy who killed his mom's newspaper clipping showing his face and his name, writes this guy down in the death note, and the guy dies in possibly the most ridiculous death in the movie. I saw your reaction. This mobster is like at a restaurant, like a fancy restaurant or whatever, and again, like weird Rube Goldberg machine where somebody drops their salt shaker, and then a waiter passing by slips on the salt shaker, spills his tray of drinks, and then I think somebody else trips and like lands on the mobster's back and pushes him forward.
Yeah.
And when he gets back up, like I think it was a steak knife that went through his throat.
Yes.
Yeah. And then he starts spitting out blood like a shower head.
Yes.
He's just like, and there's like a pause, and it's like way too long, and then all of a sudden, just because you know how when you get stabbed in the throat, it turns you into a shower head.
Yeah, of course.
Of course. But yeah, so I think it's like the next day, Light's dad comes in and says like, "Hey, that guy's dead," and he's kind of like relieved about it. And so now, all of a sudden, the use of the death note is tied to Light getting his dad's approval, because that's now his motivation, apparently.
Yeah. Definitely giving like some daddy issues. For sure.
Yeah, pretty bad. And it kind of bums me out that like that's the problem too, because again, exact opposite of Death Note, because in the original story, Light does look up to his dad. His dad's very together, and the point at which his dad dies later in the story is kind of where he loses his final shred of humanity, like towards the end of that corruption arc, because there's always like one little last thing that they're holding on to, and Light genuinely loving his dad was one of those things. So when his dad dies, he's devastated, and like that's it. And here they're making it so his relationship with his dad is bad from the beginning.
Yeah.
It's
no nuance. No room for growth.
None whatsoever. I think this is the part where, like, next day at school, he introduces Misa to the Death Note. She sees him on the stands, on the bleachers in the gym, and she's just kind of like, "What do you got there?" And he's like, "Nothing. Actually, wait, do you want to see?" Just kind of flip-flops.
Very
and then
coy about it.
Yeah, but also like very awkward, because then he, like, the way he tries to prove the existence of it to her at first is by getting her to see Ryuk, but Ryuk comes in conveniently late and says, "She can't see me, only you can." Uh, so the whole thing is embarrassing, and the way he says it, it makes it sound like he has an STD. He says, like, "I have a death god" or something like that. I will say a fun little line is when she opens up the Death Note and she reads one of the rules: "The human whose name is written in this note shall die." And she looks up at him and she says, "Your poetry is terrible."
Yeah, like that is like pretty. It is like a pretty good one there. There's very few.
Yeah,
but
it was crowded by the fact that scene was so cringe. You know, like I didn't hear it the first time. I heard it the second time I watched it with a friend, but I'm just like, okay. I mean, at least, they tried. But yeah, so eventually the way he proves it to her is by just Googling a live crime scene, as you do. And he writes down the guy on the broadcast and, like, specific conditions. He writes something like, the guy comes out, does a military salute, and then gets hit by an oncoming car or something like that. And that's exactly what happens on the broadcast. And so that convinces Misa that this is real. Now, a lot of the reason it's kind of, and this is something they hint at but don't, like, openly say, is that she gets, like, turned on by gore and killing and stuff like that. Like, I don't know, she's just super into it. And so when he starts talking about, like, killing people, she's all into it, and he has a crush on her, so she's like, "Oh, she's into it, let me, like, do this, and that can get me, an in," so to speak. Literally later, but we'll get into that. So that's how he brings it in. And so now they've made Light's motivations even worse, because he's not using the Death Note out of misguided idealism. He's using it to get his dad's approval and pussy.
exactly.
Yeah, because then they go home and they go to Light's house and they fuck.
Yeah,
while
that's
killing
their
people.
date night. It's like, who can we kill tonight? And then like, true. I'm just like, this is like, they're just going from 0 to 100. Like, she barely even knew who he was.
Yeah.
Like, low key introducing themselves to each other. Like, I know who you are. Do you? Because you're going from, like, acting like total strangers to now within, again, no indication of passage of time. This could have been that day, could have been maybe like later in the week. We have no idea. But
we
still,
don't know. It read like
relationship.
Yeah, it honestly read like it happened like literally later that day. Yeah. But and like this is part of sort of a wider problem that comes with adapting Death Note. The thing that for some reason directors seem to struggle with is that they think that just having a shot of someone writing in a notebook is going to be too boring for motion picture. This is a problem in this movie. It's a problem in the anime. I really don't think like you have to try and make it more visually interesting. I really do think part of the creepiness factor of the Death Note is that, like, in the manga, it's just frames of him writing in a notebook. And it's like normal. And that's what's creepy about it, is because it just looks like a normal action, but he's killing hundreds of people as he does it. So I think if you added more of the muted realism that you have in like the manga, I don't think that would necessarily make it boring to watch. You could add some like
absolutely not
tense music, but every adaptation gets this wrong because they think they need to make it visually interesting somehow. The anime does it in
the live action Japanese films do a pretty good, like, it's not like phenomenal, But
Okay.
they do stay really true to it being like, this is a crime thriller. They're not relying on schlock and gore and all of this. They are definitely more leaning into the suspense aspect of it, which it was still not like really well done, but it was at least suspenseful in that adaptation universe.
Yeah, exactly. The suspense is key, as is the framing, I think, because the other problem with adaptations is that people who make them tend to try and moralize Light's actions, and that ultimately undercuts the corruption arc. Also, the anime added in a bunch of like religious imagery, which also runs counter to the story, because it's like, the whole point of the story is that Light isn't a god; he's just a person, and he dies like a person. So adding in all this religious imagery completely misses the point. But that's the anime. We're talking about this one, which does something even worse when it comes to trying to make the writing scenes visually interesting, which is Misa and Light are like making out and fucking while they're writing the names. And that's going to be the thing that's going to make this interesting.
Yeah. Like, like let's watch some children get down while mass murdering. Really appealing.
Yeah.
Really great.
No, it's terrible. And then while that's happening too, there's like a montage of it. So like they do this frequently. It's a montage threaded with Light having kind of a dialogue with Misa where he talks about like, we could do something better with this. What if we start like cleaning the world up? What if we start? And so, then they're like a team. They're doing this together. Now, this is the point where there's this, we start to see exactly how badly they fucked up Mesa, because I'll say it like I'll go to bat for the corruption arc in Death Note. It is profoundly sexist. It's not without things you can criticize, right? And the treatment of Misa in it in particular is very objectifying, and it sucks to read in 2024, like that particular element. But the film, like, it's interesting because like the scriptwriter recognized this and then purposefully tried to make Misa like the opposite of that in this particular film. But it swung back around to, instead of being just kind of like objectified and useless, she was like this weird misogynistic homunculus of like the manic pixie dream girl and the evil seductress tropes.
I was like saying like this is like the yandere femcel GF on steroids.
Yeah,
like the way I was viewing her. Like she's like, I'm too fucked up for the regular boy. I need somebody who is edgy like me. Like,
yeah,
and it's supposed to be like subversive and alternative. That she's like a cheerleader, and like Margaret Qualley is like conventionally beautiful, but like she's like, look at me, like I'm a pretty cheerleader. Like people like me. I'm popular, but I'm also like fucking psycho.
Yeah.
And so like psycho does not mean like alternative, which like was Misa's original character. Like she was into like the alternative fashion. She was famous. Like she was somebody completely different. So
no, she was a fashion idol. But here she's like this just junior psychopath pretty much. And the film even goes so far as to make her like more brutal than Light is, again removing the corruption arc, which is wild. And it's to the point where like I think even sort of the script realizes that they've changed the character that much, because at some point even Ryuk starts saying, just give the notebook to her, she's a better person to deal with it than you. So like anyway. So they do this, and then I think I might have to look at my notes because I can't remember where it transitions to from here after they decide to start killing criminals. I know they give like a shitty explanation for why they're still using the name Kira. It's Light says something like, it means light in Russian and Celtic, which no, it doesn't. And Celtic isn't a language; it's a family of languages. And then says, like, this is where I'm bringing my linguistics degree into it just a little bit. He says later that like Kira kind of means killer in Japanese, and that's why he's making his these killings happen primarily in Japan to keep the authorities off his trail. That's not how that works, like linguistically. The writer doing literally the exact opposite of what happened in the story, because in the story he starts killing off criminals and people take notice, and he finds at some point like cult websites where they've started calling him Kira, and these websites are in Japanese. And so Kira is a transliteration of killer into Japanese phonology. So it's not Japanese for killer, it's English for killer. And you just
they needed a justification for like we have to whitewash everything.
Yeah. Oh yeah, we do need to talk about that, huh? We can't not talk about that with Death Note, and particularly the parts that take place in Japan in this film, because the setting is in Death Note kind of contingent on it taking place in Japan, right? To whitewash these characters also removes some really important elements, and I think like even the script knew that, because it still had to have some of this take place in Japan in order for it to work. So whitewashing it was just pointless.
Yeah. And that's going to bring us to like some really interesting complexities for when they do introduce L, because it was a choice to cast L as a black man for this film. And I don't know whether it was a good or bad choice, but it was a choice.
Yeah, for L, here's my take. Like L in the original story is an international detective, right? He's not, people don't know what country he comes from. And the most we get about his background is that he grew up in a very particular orphanage in London. So I don't think his race particularly matters to the story. They draw him as looking Asian in the manga because they do, right? But I think for a character like that who has no recognized nationality, I don't think casting a black guy to play him is a bad thing, and I happen to quite like the guy they cast. I do think, like, so what, like, casting a character named L, just the letter L, as a different race, fine. Casting a character named Light Yagami, you know, a very Japanese-sounding name, that you can't do that. That's whitewashing. These characters are Japanese. It takes place in Japan. To whitewash them is just really icky. So,
yeah. It gives it, I think, like less merit too. Like when we think about things like the transliterations, we think about some of like particular like cultural aspects and elements that like just take place from like just from a cultural studies perspective. The culture in Japan is very different than the culture here in the US. So even just like mannerisms and ways of speaking, like Light is, you know, kind of viewed as like this poster beautiful child because he's like a good student and like keeps to himself and is like very self-assured in the manga, because that is like kind of promoted like, you know, in Japanese academia culture, like to be the best of the best, go to cram school. Here people might think that he's like a sociopath if that version of Light was translated here. So they had to make him a little bit more edgy, because we wouldn't have thought like, oh, he's just like any other kid who gets corrupted, because we were like, oh, like he's like pushing himself so hard, he must have had it in him from the start.
Yeah, no, they definitely try to Americanize the characters' personalities in addition to whitewashing them. On some level, now that I think about it, casting a black guy as L may have been a red herring, a look over here kind of thing to distract from the fact that they were whitewashing. But I don't know how they would have been able to do that. And, you know, again, I actually quite like the guy who plays L. I think he's one of the better actors in this film. I really do think he did his best.
Stanfield too, like he does like I'm pretty sure that he does speak Japanese, like, or like at least can act in Japanese, because he was Yasuke the Black Samurai, also on Netflix. And so, you know, I feel like is somebody who like respects the culture and respects the source material, as somebody who has said like in interviews that he is an anime fan. So I think he was trying his best to like keep some of that like original like source material in there with him, with as little as they gave him.
Yeah. And I think, speaking of L, I think this is the point at which he appears. We switch to Japan, where there's been some sort of massacre between two Yakuza families. And L is on the scene, which you rarely ever see in Death Note. He usually stays in his hotel room, but he's on the scene, and they're trying to give us this more like punk rock version of him, where he's wearing like a ski mask and a hoodie. and he speaks to a detective and says something along the lines of like, I've been dropping data into various places to try and pinpoint Kira's location. I think he's actually in Seattle. And so he's in Japan, and then he leaves. uh, just to make that part of the story work, I guess. And he leaves with his caretaker Watari. Now, this is where the problems occur, because with Light no longer being a villain protagonist, L as a foil to him no longer has a purpose. So everything that his character is kind of meant to do or meant to be is all up in the air. And so he doesn't get any kind of consistent characterization. And it's really hard for a good actor, as good as they are, to play a character that isn't a character. A character that's more or less just there to hit certain plot beats.
Furniture.
Yeah, pretty much. And so it's like they tried to give us this like aggressive punk rock version of L, but then they also tried to give us the like lovable little autism creature that he is in the regular one. And then they didn't really know how to pull that off, because the L in the story, he's only aggressive when he has to be. It's only ever a tactic. It's not his baseline. But here, like half the time, if it's his baseline, and like half the time it isn't. And then we get all those quirky things that, like he only eats sweets or whatever. But he's also like a lot more rude. And this is where, again, we get into some problematic elements of this film, where they have the kind of BBC Sherlock problem of their way of writing an autistic character is to just make him an asshole.
Yeah, and as I ran a BBC Sherlock blog back in the day, so I can acknowledge from my long history.
No, I used to be a fan of Sherlock. I get you.
It is just like this is somebody who just does not know how to talk to people, and that I think too, when we see as Al is like segueing into Seattle, like meeting like with like Light's dad, and is like, I think your son is Kira. Like that is, I think, like not necessarily even like rude. It's just like there's no nuance. At least L, like in the manga, like had like a little bit of like, like I'm gonna dangle this in front of you to like keep the conversation going. And I'm gonna drop hints. Like he was still like very succinct, but like not to the point where he was like outright just like dropping things with no explanation like that.
Yeah, he also like overstepped several boundaries from the very beginning with Light's dad. I don't think he didn't know immediately that it was Light, but he knew it was within the Seattle PD. And the way he explains that is by taking all of Light's dad's evidence about Kira and moving it without his permission, making him come to this site, admitting to having hacked the Seattle PD network without telling him.
Definitely a felony.
Yeah, he's just a jerk, and then like tries to make it better by giving him an ice cream cone,
which like is like super funny, like like as like a bit all on its own. But like whenever we see like the characterization of L later on, like it just like doesn't make any sense, because there, like you said, there's no consistent characterization. We don't see that silly subversive element of L ever again for the rest of the film.
No, because that was one of those times when they tried to go back to what L was originally in the manga, because L being like the most iconic character next to Ryuk, I think. They knew they had to take something from the source material, but because they had removed the primary purpose of his character, they completely dropped the ball on it. But yeah, I mean, man, we've already had a lot to say about this. We're not even halfway through the film. I think it's at this point where L does his confrontation with Kira, right? Like he does the broadcast and he challenges Kira to kill him, and Kira can't do it. Another thing they fucked up, they just fucked up the logic of it, because like maybe he wasn't watching the broadcast. Maybe he just wasn't watching it. But in the manga, L had a contingency for that. He's put in a sort of a decoy guy first, and then the guy dies, and that's L's proof that Kira is watching this broadcast. And it's also Light's first sort of part where he slips and he's like, I'm gonna kill you, I'll show you, even though he knows L isn't a criminal. So yeah, but they eliminated that step So they just had him do this monologue, and of course there was a shot of an American flag waving behind him because this
Oh,
script
the
was written in
justice.
the script was written in the aughts when people still did that in a lot of films after 9/11. so, so
Gotta
yeah,
commit to the bit.
yeah, I don't know why they fucking bothered, and the thing was whitewashed enough already. I think that might be the halfway point. I think it
Yeah.
is.
So I'm keeping an eye on our time here, so I'll try to not like tangent and everything and just kind
No,
of
you
like
can
miss
tangent.
this.
It's fine.
Okay,
It's
all
totally
right.
fine.
So at this point, like we have Elle, working with with Light's father essentially, and at all this time, Light and Misa are still like very much like hard at work at like what they want to do, and Misa's getting like a lot more like aggressive about it,
Yeah,
and Ryuk also is like dropping like hints of like here's some of the rules that you can look at, including the rule that if you burn a page after writing on it, then it'll like eliminate that particular path to death.
which is not
But
even
you can
fucking
only
canon.
yeah, it's not canon, and you can only do it once. So what do Light and company decide to do? Which is we need to figure out who Elle is, and by doing that, writing this big whole long like spiel about Watari, Elle's caretaker. And
Wait. Wasn't there a
yes,
part where I totally forgot about this. Light's dad does a broadcast too, doesn't he?
oh yes, I forgot all about
Yeah,
that. So
and then
Light's
Lisa
dad is a
tries to kill him.
broadcaster. Yes, yeah, like a Light's dad is trying to broadcast, so because like we can like prove like is this like, and Light's not gonna kill his own dad, right?
Yeah,
And so like that's like a way to like like kind of be like, can we rule out Light as a suspect? And like he doesn't want to believe that it could be his son, but like being like, see, like my son wouldn't
yeah,
kill me, and Kira would, like, so there's like that whole like weird thing, and like Misa's like very like gung-ho about like you should be okay with killing your dad, like for the sake of being
yeah,
Kira, like you need to know that it's Kira.
yeah.
Like
She's the
he's
one who got the
expendable.
corruption arc.
Yeah, which is like very cool. They made her a villain, awesome. But like in doing that, like I think that's what we see, like a complication happening between Light and Misa at this point, because she's kind of the one who's like the more assertive in the relationship now, even though
Yeah,
she is not the holder of the Death Note. She is the one kind of calling more of the shots
yeah. I
from
think
this
she
point
also.
forward.
Sorry, doesn't she also kill those FBI agents who are tailing them? And that was
Yes,
another.
yeah,
Yeah, but it's implied that Ryuk did it. But then it's a twist later that she's the one
yeah.
who did it, even though I figured that was the case in the first place.
Yeah, because
Yeah.
Ryuk, like, is again, like, supposed to be just sitting back and watching. So, like, Misa's like doing the God of Death's work. She's the one who is like doing all of the killings, planning all the things, and is suggesting all of these really heinous actions to maintain like the Kira facade. When they go into like where they're going to try to find out like Elle's identity, they're
Mm-hmm.
going to break down this whole big thing where Watari is going to call Light and say what like Elle's name is, and like here's how like the death's going to happen at this specific date at this specific time, and that if we burn the page afterwards, like he'll survive, and like they won't be suspicious of us, but we will have Elle's information. Immediately, they get a call from Watari saying, "I do not have this information," and it's just I feel like it was something that was like incredibly funny that was not meant to be funny.
Yeah.
Just like the timing of it was so comedic of like, I don't have this. I'm like, because it was right away. It was as soon as like he pulled the pen off the paper, his phone starts ringing. And so Light's like yelling at him, like, well, what do you mean? Like, and then Watari's like, oh, like the information's like back at the orphanage, and gives the whole spiel about the orphanage, where, like all of these like orphans were like basically trained to become mega masterminds if they like made it through this program and become super detectives, essentially.
Yeah.
Which I also have beef with, because there is a whole like crew of the super detective orphan youths in the manga series that we don't get. Like the character of Nier that we get in the manga, like, and there's others as well, but like, I want to talk about Nier because Nier was pivotal to the end of the series.
Yeah.
And to the story coming to a head, and we are totally erasing any of these other kids that were at the orphanage that would spoiler for the manga a little bit, just like turn it mute, and if you don't want to hear it, that succeed after L's passing. They are the ones who follow him in succession.
Yeah, for the
to
record,
assist in the
too.
case.
Yeah, L does die midway through the Death Note original story at first, and that's a creative choice that most people don't agree with. To tie it a little bit back to BBC Sherlock, actually, it's kind of like what Sherlock did to Moriarty, where they killed him off way too soon. The back half of the story kind of struggles, but then you get L's successors, Mello and Near, who kind of carry it and ultimately lead to Light getting arrested. There are some loose ends at the end of this movie, and they have hinted at a sequel, believe it or not, and we'll get into it in a second.
No!
We'll get into that at the end.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think the thing that most adequately sums up the cringeworthy experience of watching this is that one scene where Light's talking to his dad about L's identity and trying to figure it out. And Light's dad says, "I think I could tell if a killer like Kira was sitting across from me."
And they show like just like sitting there, like it's like, oh my gosh, it's like that little meme of like the dog in the burning room, like this is fine.
Yeah.
This is fine. So we have this whole situation happening, like with Watari and Light's like, go to the orphanage, get the information. We have essentially like this like weird little accelerated time frame where like, okay, Watari is like now in England and getting the info or whatever.
I think in this movie they put it in Canada instead, in the weirdest looking Victorian.
It's so strange.
Yeah, with like checkered floors and stripy walls. Like it's so weird.
Anyway, he's in this Alice in Wonderland ass funhouse.
Yeah.
And finding this info and is about to like is like talking like his name, and then like the page does not get burned, so homie gets shot. And it is like Light is devastated, and it's like, you know, like reveal like Misa has been like, you know, like playing around with the Death Note, like, and like we can't burn a page. So at this point, like there's friction between them because this plan didn't succeed. And so we're getting, you know, like it's kind of ramping up, and like I'm trying to like fill in blanks in my head here because from here on it was like all a blur.
There's
just like there's yeah.
Go ahead. Oh, okay. So this is where L kind of realizes that Watari is gone, and this is what I mean.
Bingo.
Yeah, this is what I mean when I say like he was one of the better actors in this field in this film. I mean, because this is one of two times in which I felt like an emotional reaction in this film, and it was watching him react to his caretaker being dead. Like that was heartbreaking, and it makes me so mad that this had to exist in this film, and that this wonderful actor had to put this kind of performance into this god-awful piece of trash.
Yeah, and so like during this like very devastating moment for L, like he is in the Turner household, like tearing shit up.
Oh yeah. He goes after them.
Because he was like, Watari would just like never disappear, because before he even knows that Watari is dead, he's like, he would never disappear without telling me. He is never not by my side. Like if he is not, he tells me. There is like that communication between the two of them. So he is like in their house tearing shit up, being like, there is something afoot at this point.
Yeah. Well, doesn't he accuse Light of being Kira? He just like jumps at the table and he's like, "You're Kira," and his dad's like, "Whoa, what the?"
Yeah, because like that moment, like like that's all like he, you know, is reading of the situation, and I think at that point. So naturally, like Light is like pissed because he's worried that the jig is going to be up, and I'm trying. Oh my gosh! Like I have notes here too. So like, let me pull my notes up so I can like remember. Like, because the ADHD brain.
Yeah, well, it did get pretty. The plot kind of split in 5 different directions at this point. I do know that like they didn't find the Death Note or any of the pages in it because Misa kind of went away early during that scene at the dinner table, and she got them, took them out of the house before the police could find it. And then there was like there was also a scene I think beforehand where Light was like in a cafe, and Elle sort of like jumps in and says, "I know you're Kira," and they have this kind of like back and forth
very cordial discussion.
Yeah.
My notes are they're being strange. So just give me one sec to pull up the rest of my little notes. So we have like these like very like emotionally charged scenes, like coupled with like those like strange moments that are just like kind of like lucid. That discussion. So whenever we have Elle coming in and ransacking the house. Let's fast forward a little bit, and this is whenever Light and Misa are going to the school dance. Now I remember.
Right,
So,
and it all happens at the school dance, and this is where it
yeah,
becomes like a fucking Disney straight-to-video movie.
it's all of the coming of age film tropes. So they're like, we don't want to like have to deal with Elle. We don't want to deal with the cops. So we're just like going to go to the dance because like, duh, like that's what teenagers do. So whenever like they see that like like there have been more deaths and everything, only one victim could be saved, Watanabe's page was like not able to be like burned. That's when Misa is basically telling like I wrote your name in it. And
there's two things. I'm sorry. There's two things about this part that I really want to talk about.
Yes,
one is the part where Light opens up his locker to get the Death Note out, and there's a piece of paper that says "Normal people scare me."
Oh, I didn't even catch that.
It's in the American Horror Story font. It's so good.
Oh my god! I did not. I don't want to have to go back and watch. I'm gonna have to like catch that. Like,
I'll send you. I think I took a picture of it, so I'll send you the picture so that you can see it. The second thing is, at some point in here, there's a chase scene where Elle is chasing Light, like on foot, and it goes on so long, and he chases him through like 5 different settings, like upstairs, downstairs, through a restaurant, through a store, like so many different. This takes too long. Finally, they have like a showdown, and like this is another one of the parts that kind of got me excited, because like I liked the vibe that they had, like the dynamic they had in that specific instant. I think that was after Light figures out that Misa wrote his name in the notebook, and so he says like, wait, we can work together, and Elle's like, no, I don't want to. And then some line cook who's like a Kira cultist comes out and hits Elle over the head with something and knocks him out. Undercuts what could have been the only good scene in the movie.
Yeah, like so we have like this like cat and mouse sort of like game happening with this chase that's leading up to like Misa and later like at this giant Ferris wheel that has no reason to be.
Actually does.
The Great Wheel in Seattle has no reason to be in the story.
Well, I mean, they put the Space Needle at the beginning. They want to use the setting.
I guess so. So, like, they're chilling on the Great Wheel, and eventually, they're like kind of having this altercation, and the structure gets destroyed. Ryuk is kind of like playing a role in this, and like, we're gonna kill Misa. Even though she was like, Light, I have more conviction than you. I would be a better Kira than you. Like, you should just give the book to me. Like, no, she's got to go down. We can't have a villain in this story. Yeah, I guess not.
Especially because like she's portrayed as being very irrational. Because as we all know, woman emotional, and emotion make woman crazy. But no, it's. Yeah, and that was the part too where like they're having this altercation, and there's like dramatic music behind it. But then there's a point where the music stops at like a comically timed moment, and she says like, "You wrote my name in it, didn't you?"
Yeah, it's like you wrote my name down. You wrote my name down, and it's just like so like the delivery is like that of like a like high school comedy. Like it is just so like jarringly executed. So then at this point too, I'm kind of offended at the way that they like did Misa's death, because everybody else got these like really gruesome, gory scenes. And as we have like the wheel collapsing, I like will say like is like very interesting. It was like shot okay, like the effects were fine, but it's like she's kind of like plunging into the water here, and like impaled a little bit, but essentially she's like in the water and like there's blood, but there's not like she's not exploding on impact or anything. There with like the level of gore that they had at the beginning of the film, you'd think they would go all out with Lisa's death, but no, we just have this really anticlimactic her, like just like in the water dead.
Yeah.
And then Light is like also like, you know, this is where it gets a little like funky fun. So Light had masterminded this whole thing,
which is not earned.
Yeah. In that he is like, you know, in this medically induced coma after collapsing from this Ferris wheel, because like of course he survives it, you know, like that makes total sense that like we have one survivor of this
even though they fell from the same height.
Yeah, like totally, like maybe his boy bones made him stronger. I don't know.
Can we actually can we talk about that, because there's a part in there that's like the perfect metaphor for how dog shit this movie is. The page with his name on it flutters through the air and down and lands in a very conveniently placed garbage can, which just happens to be on fire, and it just happens to land.
It's insane. Like the Rube Goldberg mechanics of this film. Like, I mean, swear to God.
It's also just like great how, you know, it's kind of a metaphor for how this abandoned script suddenly turned into a trash fire.
Yeah, it's just like, you know, it's just like life imitates art.
Yeah.
Or the other way around. I don't know. But either way, so he is like orchestrated like essentially this entire like crux here at the end, wherein he has like, you know, this doctor who's been in some shady dealings, who's like, it's all written in the note, like this doctor rescues him and puts him in the coma. And then another criminal is, you know, finding the notebook and is just like magically puts it on Light's like chest in his little hospital.
Well, that was written in, but also because he gets the death note and this doctor can take him in and out of the coma, he can continue writing names in it, which is how he gets Elle off his tail by, you know, like, oh, well, Light's in a coma and killings are still happening.
He can't write in them. Yeah. So this guy is writing the names in, you know, like in place of Light while he is induced. And then both of these guys, die by suicide from the death note. So after this, cops are like, Elle, like, you gotta take a break a little bit, like you need to be you have to be off the case, which like valid. He was going a little buck wild there. So he's been ordered off the case, but that is not like stopping him. So what he ends up doing is he raids the house and they go to Misa's house, I think, right? Not Light's house. And they find the page with the agents' names on it. And he is just like devastated in finding this. And this is like another scene that I think is like done really well, is that like we have like Elle kind of like ravaging through here and like just tearing shit up in like a very different way than he was tearing shit up in the Turner's house, because he is like, you know, at this point he's desperate and he is like trying to find something. This is where it gets weird for me, because there's like simultaneously these things are happening, that like Light is now like, you know, out of the coma and his dad's talking to him. He's like, so it's true. And he's having this like heart to heart with his father about all of this and explaining about like the lesser of two evils argument, but all the while it's like implied that like Elle is gonna write down Light's name in the note that he's found. So we have like these two things, and there's not really closure. Like, this is the end of the film, but it ends with Ryuk just being like, humans are so interesting, and like that's it. So, and he's just like laughing and like this crazy, like, this is Willem Dafoe, you know, so it's like, like very much, you know, giving that like very like over the top vibe. But we have like this very like deep conversation with Light and his father, like being like, oh, Light has finally seen the light, for lack of a better term. Like,
well, it's his dad figures out that he's Kira, right?
Yeah,
he figures it out. But yeah, I mean, that's essentially the end of the film, but it's all, there's a lot of loose ends, and the reason is, and we can talk about this now, they do plan on doing a sequel.
It's so strange to me. Like,
the story surrounding the script for the sequel is also fucked, if you want to hear it.
Yes, please do. Because I have not been consuming that media, so I'm not sure like what direction they're going in with this.
I didn't know they were going to make a sequel until recently when I was looking up information about this film. But yeah, the reason there was all those loose ends is because they were going to try and do a sequel, but the reception was so terrible. And any plans for a sequel, there had to be a lot of changes in order to account for the fact that the fans are just like, you fucked this up immensely. What are you going to do with this? And so they had a different guy, work on the script. About 2 years went by. He's sort of alluding to this, and he's speaking to Death Note fans, and he's saying like, we want to right the wrongs of what happened. And then out of the blue, he gets fired, and Netflix decides we're not going to make a sequel movie. We're going to make a series, and we're going to get a different screenwriter, and we're going to get the Stranger Things guys to do it.
Oh, not Duffers.
Yeah, now that was, I think, 2 years ago that happened, and nothing has come of it. So this potential sequel, it's out there somewhere, but it's stuck in development hell. So one of these days, it's just going to jump scare us.
Oh, yeah, like, that makes me feel so hopeless. Deb, I'm gonna be so honest with you. That just like sucked a piece of my soul out of my chest and like threw it in my garbage can. To know that that's a thing that's existing, that like lives in the ether or on a shelf somewhere in Netflix headquarters. Just the fact that it exists like makes me physically ache.
Yeah, and that there's probably like several versions of it, and it's the worst actually. Yeah, I really think they should just toss it out and start from scratch. I really do. But yeah, I mean, I suppose this episode is very much informed by like our particular fandom over Death Note, but for someone who like hasn't seen or doesn't know the original story, emphatically, I cannot stress this enough. Do not watch this movie. just read the manga. It's very good. It's got its problems and it's dated, but it's a really good story about like a villain protagonist. And it's a great roadmap for a corruption arc. So, you know, we do have to rate this film on a scale of 1 to 5. 1 being not that bad, 5 being the worst piece of trash you've ever seen in your life. Where would you put Death Note 2017?
So I'm going to give 2 ratings. 1 for fans of the manga and 1 for regular people. So for regular people, I'm going to say this is a 3.5.
Okay. That's
like
generous.
That you could get just based on the acting of Lakeith Stanfield alone. Just like as L. Some of those comedic moments, and I will say there are some really interesting shots.
Yeah, the cinematography is nice.
Yeah, and the score is pretty good. You're not going to be getting anything great with it, but I would say like, oh, you can sit down and you can like laugh at it with your friends. For fans of the manga, this is a 5. This is one of the worst things that you will ever consume because every 2 minutes you are going to be pausing and saying, why the fuck did they do that? Because it's just like, if you're going in knowing the source material, know that you are not getting that story whatsoever. Like it is just completely disregarding the source other than the fact that a notebook falls out of the sky from a death god. The core of the narrative is just gone. So those are my ratings.
Yeah, I'm going to match those ratings, and I'm going to bump up the rating to 4 out of 5 for those who are not familiar with Death Note. Because like I said, I watched this with Victor, who had no prior knowledge of Death Note. And like by the end of it, they were like, that was boring. That was really boring. There was no like plot or intrigue. Stuff just happened for an hour and 40 minutes. So yeah, like 3.5 to 4 is adequate. But even the Rotten Tomatoes score is somewhere around like 4%, I think, or something. Like it's not very, very hated, this film. But yeah, if you're a fan of the manga or even the anime, which I have my issues with it, but there are people who like it, and fine, that's great. Like even if you're a fan of the anime, you would hate this movie.
Yeah.
You would hate it. And I think if you also are a person who cares about good writing or quality art, you would probably hate this movie too. Yes. It's terrible. Don't watch it. It's bad. So now that we're done talking about this piece of garbage, we can talk about you, Carina Stopenski.
Of course.
author and anime scholar. I didn't know that about you. I didn't know that you were like a manga and anime scholar.
Yeah, I for a while I was like just like a peer reviewer for the Journal of Anime and Manga Studies, and I presented on the conference circuit on cartoons and animation, particularly in the horror sphere. So like in addition to like being like a writer and like a librarian, I also do a lot of like really fun like academic research on what a lot of people call low media. So cartoons, video games, and I love to do stuff about like smutty reality TV as well. So that's kind of like my bread and butter with
Right.
academic research.
I love that. That's cool. Yeah, I'm a big fan of animation as well. Like a lot of my watching habits are just watching indie animated stuff on YouTube. So
Yeah.
yeah, it's always fun to see that. I love thesis film season because you get some like new talent putting out really interesting stuff. Um, yeah, so I have a couple of interview questions for you. First would be, what is your favorite shitty movie, and tell me what you love about it.
So I'm actually going to go with a genre of shitty movie because I thought I
Okay.
mulled a lot over this question
Okay.
personally because I couldn't think of just one because my favorite shitty movie is any Lifetime movie network movie.
Ah, yeah.
Um,
Okay. Okay. No, I
so
get you. I get you.
yeah, they are formulaic, you know. So at the beginning it's always just like you either have a flashback or a flash forward of someone like getting their like they're getting strangled or like they're getting their tires slashed or some woman is being chased through the forest by some indeterminate individual, and then it says like 6 weeks earlier or 6 weeks later, and it's always in like a weird like papyrus-esque font. It's very fun, and it's always just some boring white woman. So they've been more diverse in recent years, which I think is great, but like those vintage ones, it's always just some like housewife lady who's like, my husband is up to no good and I'm gonna see what's about it, and he's either like doing drugs or involved in some like weird crime ring or like involved in like sex trafficking, and it's just like insanity, or someone's locked in the basement. But they always end with like the climax happens in the last like 2.5 minutes, and somebody falls down a flight of stairs, or but then always at the end they always have to show you there's resolution. Like they can't just like have you like expect they always show like it'll say 1 year later and everybody who you wanted to have survive is happy. Like they have to assure to you like they're okay now, they're fine. And as somebody who like very intensely feels the emotions of others, I like watch this, I'm like, oh, okay, she's okay now. Like look, her house is safe again, like she has her daughter back, or
Right.
like
Yeah.
she
Yeah.
got to
Yeah.
move somewhere new, her career is saved. They are just so, and they're so poorly acted as
Yeah.
well. But like in a way that is like cheesy and fun as opposed to like bad. Like you enjoy because like they're like acting for stage, but for the
Yeah.
screen. It's so over the top, and
Yeah. Yeah.
they're just like really great like Friday night movie watches because like they'll just play from like 5 p.m. till like midnight on Lifetime Movie Network. Just crank them out, sit in a
Yeah.
row, all three. It's great.
Yeah. Very much the asylum model of movie production. That's
Oh yeah.
frequent viewers will know what I'm talking about there. But yeah, so my second question for you is, what's the worst movie you've ever seen? It doesn't have to be horror, just a movie you hate.
So the one that I'm gonna go with actually is horror, and it was one that I watched recently, like only like a couple months ago. And it goes by two different names. Like one name for it is Necro Lover, and the other one is Stiff. And it is about a suicidal guy who likes to call a suicide hotline, and then the girl on the other end is like, "Ooh, he's really depressed," and she's a necrophile. And so she gives him her like personal phone number, and they develop a relationship. It's basically her like trying to coax him into suicide the whole movie. And him being like, "Oh, my will to live is back because I found this woman who I really love." But then he just like kills himself at the end anyway, and then she's like sad that he killed himself. And this was a movie that was filmed in Pittsburgh. I'm from Pittsburgh, and I was watching this film like, oh, I recognize that landmark. I recognize this. I recognize that. I'm like, they let this horrible, horrible movie, like people talking about like in broad daylight in my city, talking about fucking corpses. Are you kidding me? But it was on Tubi. So it's still, I think it's still
Right,
on
okay.
Tubi, like where all of them are, you know, like all of the really, really bad ones.
Yeah.
And it was only like 75 minutes, but it's 75 minutes I can like never get back.
Yeah.
It was just
Wow.
so bad, so poorly acted. Like they said the
It's
character
so wild.
every 5 minutes. I'm just like, this is like, we know who you're talking to. There's only 2 characters in the whole movie. Like, you don't need to say each other's names the whole time.
Yeah, that's fascinating because there are some parts of that premise that interest me and I think could be pulled off well, but there are some parts of that premise that suck a lot.
Yeah, I thought it was going to be like a comedy. Like, I really thought it was going to be like comedic. I was like, this sounds like
that
a
could
really
be a
like,
good comedy.
yeah, but like they went in like the romance direction with it and then into like full horror at the end. And I was like, and like the effects were also like really bad. Like the blood in the bathtub looked like barbecue sauce. Like it was just it was so bad. And like just so like somebody else, like, you know, take that idea and make it better, I guess, because it is a very intriguing premise, and I wouldn't have watched it if I didn't think it was going to look interesting. And it just like
Yeah.
failed in so many ways.
Yeah, that kind of thing needs to be a comedy because if you make it anything else, it starts to get really weird. I mean,
Yeah.
not that like making uncomfortable media is a bad thing. I just finished Gone to See the Riverman, so I should know. But
Oh,
yeah,
incredible. Yeah.
yeah, no, that was a great book, a terrible book, a very, very uncomfortable, disturbing book, one of the most disturbing reads I've ever had. But it makes you think about how you think about your regrets and your bad decisions and how people
Yeah.
justify them. Compelling, but yeah, not
Yeah, no
not
cigar, you
family
know,
fun
it wasn't
talks.
great. Yeah.
Yeah. So what's what kind of horror genre is your favorite, and what is your favorite way to get it? It's like books,
Mm,
movies, audiobooks, that kind of thing.
yeah. So I am a big body horror aficionado, both in the literature that in media I consume as well as what I write. I love a good transformation narrative,
Hmm.
whether it be like a monstrous transformation or like, you know, like a villain transformation. Like I love a good corruption arc. But for
Yeah.
me, like I really really love gore that is done stylistically. So not
Oh
like
yeah.
I'm
Yeah.
not I like not like for the slashing for the sake of slashing. I went through like a really edgy movie phase when I was in college where I was like telling everybody like, "Oh, have you seen a Serbian film?" Because I was one of those,
Ah.
and was like just like consuming like the disturbing movie Iceberg at like 19 years old. But like for me now, I've like noticed I really really love like I love the new French extremity movement. I think that that's like something that's like really indicative of the kind of stuff that I am writing. But I also like really love like 80s monster movies, and like the camp that comes with them. So I try to infuse that like a little bit into like the body horror that I write, because primarily I write body horror, and sometimes we'll veer into more of like the real life terrors, like vibe of things.
Yeah.
I love a good audiobook. They are so convenient for you. I am a librarian, so I'm telling everybody here, please get a library card if you do not have one already.
Oh
I
yeah.
am begging
Absolutely.
you. I am begging you, begging you. If you are a manga fan like we are here, look up the Japan Foundation's online library card. You can get free manga, like through Japan Foundation as a library card on the Libby app.
I'm actually
Um,
gonna look into that. You said the Japan
yes,
Foundation. I'm gonna write that
the
down.
Japan Foundation. Everybody gets a library card. Like you do not need to like live in a certain place. You can have 5 books checked out at a time, 5 books on hold at a time, and you can, you know, get like Japanese literature, including some really hard to get manga for free. But I love an audiobook because I am a transit warrior. I ride the bus and I love to listen to an audiobook when I'm on my bus commute. Um, and I also really, really love just horror movies. Avid Shutter watcher, and every fall season, I try to watch a horror movie a day in September and October. I
Hmm.
faltered a little bit in this season, you know, being injured and whatnot.
Right.
Had
Yeah.
a few days where I wasn't really consuming anything.
Hmm.
But I really like just love to sit down like with a movie and like turn all my devices off and just like be fully immersed in a media.
Yeah.
And being, you know, ADHD, it's really easy to get distracted when you're reading like physical pages sometimes.
Yeah.
So to be like listening to something and watching something is really, really great for me because I can focus all my attention on the sound and the sensory aspect in that regard and not be
Yeah.
distracted by other sounds around me.
Yeah, I very much agree. I listen to like audiobooks and podcasts while I'm out driving because I'm a delivery driver. So yeah, it's there's something about like audiobooks that kind of help me focus too when you have that sensory thing.
Yeah.
And you know, you can do something with your hands in the meantime, you know, because I do a lot of
Mhm.
crafts as well. So I'll listen to
Yeah,
audiobooks while I'm working on
same.
crafts or while I'm cleaning. Yeah, so that I enjoy that about audiobooks. I've always like sort of disliked the discourse about like how audiobooks are cheating because like no,
They
they're
are
not.
real books.
Yeah, also like
Mhm.
we were telling stories long before we were writing them down. Like
Mhm.
there's a lot of cultures that still have a strong oral tradition to this day, or there's not
Mhm.
real stories. Like no, fuck off. Also, like if you think it's like stupid to listen to an audiobook, do you think all blind people are morons? Like no, of course not.
Exactly. Yeah, like like as a librarian, I will promote till the day I die that if you are getting an audiobook from the library, if you are getting a braille book from the library, if you are getting any kind of a book material that is branded as book, a playaway reader, anything that you can listen to or feel or see, that is a book. Do not discourage yourself and think that, oh, I'm not a reader because I can't sit down and read. You can listen to a book and it is
Yeah,
still reading. So
yeah,
anybody who might consider themselves a reluctant reader and you only like to watch movies, go get a library card or log in with your library card on like the Libby or Hoopla app and
yeah.
download yourself a short audiobook and rediscover a love of reading, because I think that's a really,
Yeah.
really important thing for people to do.
Absolutely. And also a friendly reminder that books at the library are indeed free.
Yes,
I
it's all
remember seeing a
free. It's all
thing.
free.
Exactly. I remember seeing a thing go around a while back where there was like this trend of like people purchasing books on Amazon and then returning them as like a hack, but it was causing authors to owe money to Amazon. So
Yeah.
somebody please tell the kids that libraries have free books and you can get them
Yes.
there. Please somebody tell them. But
Yes. Spread the word.
yeah, exactly. All right. Next question. What would you like to see more of in horror? What kind of topics
Mm.
or more focus or like what do you think is kind of an untapped market that you want to see more of?
I have a couple thoughts about this. One, I would love to see more trans horror that does not focus on transition.
Hey,
A
I wrote a book
lot.
like that.
Yeah,
Read my
exactly.
book. It's
Yes.
called Fever Dreams. It's on Amazon.
Gotcha. So like there was like one like there's like this one trope that we see over and over again. In my academic thesis in undergrad was all about wrong body discourse and the centralization of the transition narrative in trans stories. And you know, it makes a good avenue when we have body horror. When we think about transition, like Transmuted by Eve Harms is one of my favorite books. And I think it does that trope well because it satirizes it a little bit, and like we're making fun
Mhm,
of it. Like it's not just like wrong body discourse, it's wrong society discourse, and there's like so much like weird culty stuff happening, and it's great. um
mhm.
but we see like that's the trope that it's like reduced to. And there was a
Oh, real
film that,
quick, I do want
yeah.
to jump in for anybody who's unfamiliar. Wrong body discourse refers to the dated narrative that trans people feel they were born in the wrong body. This is
Yeah.
not really correct or accurate to the experience, as I can say myself being a trans
Yeah.
guy. That wasn't the sensation I had. But anyway, continue.
Mhm. Yeah, like it's a very like problematic term because like we are all born with a body, just sometimes we want to change things about it, but it doesn't make the self incorrect.
Yeah.
And there was a film that I saw recently that it was called Satranic Panic. Director was like 17 or 18 years old, like, and it was like a stellar subversion of this trope. And like our main character is like, you know, already like on hormones and all this stuff, and like the doctor's the bad guy, and it was just like a very, very interesting way of like dissecting that trope and like making fun of it. So I would love to see more stuff that just like does not focus on the transition element.
That's
In the
so
same vein,
funny.
yeah.
Satranic Panic, you said it was called.
Yeah, it was great. I saw like we have a little art house theater here in Pittsburgh that showed it for like one night only, like back in like, oh, like January. And like the director, it's like her third film, and she's like a
Wow.
teenager, and like she's like some sort of like film like like prodigy. You know, it was like just really
Oh,
really
wow.
really
Yeah.
great stuff. So highly recommend that. In the same vein as like having more non transitions and trans stories. I would love to see more stories about disability that are not about like being othered in horror, because we see disability often as like a hindrance in horror, or we will have like, you know, characters getting their limbs ripped off, or we'll have people that are like, you know, haunted by ghosts and wraiths. So those are like viewed as like, you know.
We have the same taste in media, because guess
Yeah.
what also is an element of my book Fever Dreams? It's
Oh,
that.
wow. Look at that. Yeah, like I think that's something that is like really, really like striking, is that we have people understanding too, like a lot more about like invisible disability. And my novel coming
Also
out,
a thing in Fever Dreams.
yeah, like, and like, so like my novel coming out, like, on my main character, like, you don't know if she's like actually being haunted by something or if she's suffering from psychosis. And I think it's like really important to like depict mental illness and invisible disabilities in a way that doesn't really like you know like catastrophize the experience. It like can still be part of the plot without being like this evil, horrible thing that's happening to you. You can just exist,
See,
which, you
that's
know, is
so
not. Yeah.
interesting. I really need to read your book when it comes out, because that's an element of Fever Dreams, is the main character has type 1 bipolar and antisocial personality disorder. And as particularly the APD comes in handy for him in the particular context that
Okay.
he's in. Because cluster B personality disorder is something that I have an interest in, and I think they're wrongfully
Yes.
stigmatized in a lot of ways. So,
Yeah.
yeah, I need
Yeah,
to
as a
read your
cluster
book when
B
it's out.
baddie, I understand. Yeah, like I totally get it. Yeah, I
Yeah,
have to give it a read then. Yeah, like we'll have to do a little swap and review. I'm
yeah,
in favor of
yeah.
that. Yeah, but those are some things. And also, I would just like to see more horror comics. I work with a comics organization here
Oh,
in
okay.
Pittsburgh, Incubator Productions. And there is so much great horror coming into the comics industry right now. And I would just love to see more of it. Like, no specific thing, but I just would like to see more horror comics, because we're getting a lot of great stuff right now.
Yeah, you can do a lot with horror and visual storytelling. So I'm
Oh,
glad that
yeah.
there's more of that. I mean, I grew up like that. My first sort of splatterpunk things that I read were like Hellraiser comics, Johnny the Homicidal Maniac, Lenore, that sort
Oh,
of stuff.
yes.
Yeah, okay, we have similar. I see. Okay, similar
Yes.
histories as
The
well.
wheels are
Maybe we should be
turning.
friends.
Yeah, it's like definitely like it's giving like the millennial Gen Z cusp when you're just like a weird trans person.
Are
Like
you
that's just how it is.
1995?
I'm 97.
Okay, I'm 95.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah.
Okay, all right. We're like AUs of each other. That's cool.
Yeah, that's great.
I love that. All right. What was the next question that I had on here? Oh, we already kind of talked about this. You're working on a book, or that's coming out like first week of December. You said, right?
Yeah, so my novel, Stuffed, is coming out with Unveiling Nightmares December 6th. It is about a taxidermist named Electra who has a whole lot of religious trauma
Mm-hmm.
and is kind of haunted by this not deer-esque cryptid god called the she-stag. And that little haunting becomes extra heightened when this woman named Raina comes to the taxidermy studio dying of renal failure and says, I would like you to taxidermize me when I die. So it kind of evolves into this like very strange like story of like obsession and love and devotion, how devoted we are to the people we care about versus our craft versus our faith. There's a lot of really gnarly body horror scenes in it. It's really grotesque. There's some spicy stuff in it too for those
Oh,
who are
good.
a fan of that. Not a lot. I would say it's like, you know, 1 or 2 peppers like on like the spice scale.
Right.
But it's like primarily like it is like that blending of like the extreme body horror story with the folk horror of like Appalachian lore, like because I'm from
Ooh,
Appalachia.
fun.
And the not deer is like, you know, an Appalachian like cryptid. We see so much about Mothman, and I was like, we need some more recognition for other
More. Okay.
cryptids around here. And then also my short story collection, The Things We Do for Blood, just came out in August from Alien Buddha Press. And that is a collection of a bunch of tales of transformation and terror, focusing on the things that we do for those that we love, whether it be mutilating ourselves or mutilating others, going through drastic transformations, going to extreme lengths to save others and ourselves. So there's a variety of different horror genres in that collection, spanning from supernatural to body horror to some sci-fi horror and apocalypse stuff. There's just a lot of really fun queer elements there as well. Both of the stories are like, you know, very inherently linked to like the lesbian experience. But both of those, like, I feel like really like, you know, hit home like that like body horror perspective for me. So those are and I have a couple projects in progress right now that I'm working on that are that do not have homes yet, but looking for homes for 2 different manuscripts. One is basically I'm calling it like a trans hybrid of Haunting of Hill House and any sort of I don't know if anybody here has played We Know the Devil. It is a visual novel, so it's kind of like a hybrid of those 2 things. Any sort of like weird like cabin in the woods type of trans narrative.
Right. Yeah.
So it's a little more spooky than gory. And then I have another story that I'm working on that is an extreme horror story about a neuroscience PhD who is in a BDSM relationship with her partner and wants to test the limits of pain and pleasure in her PhD thesis.
Ooh,
and
very
enlists her
Hellraiser.
partner to enlist her partner to enact these really heinous acts upon her in the name of academic research. And again, it's confronting that same sort of how far will we go? I really like to discuss academia and occupational things and stuff I'm writing, because like we often sacrifice our bodies quite frequently for the work that we do. So it's really leaning into the way that academia can often exploit scholars and how far we'll go to make ourselves have a stamp on our field.
Yeah, that all sounds really good.
Yeah.
That sounds fun. Yeah, keep in touch. Do you have like links to your stuff or your socials? Where can people find that?
So people can go to www.carinastopensky.writer.com. That is my main website where you can email me. You can contact me on the thread. I keep a blog up there. I have all of my updates on recent publications on that site. So that's for more like professional avenues. If you want to just like pop and say hey and do something, I'm on TikTok at magenta_menace. So you can find me on there. I haven't been active in a while, but you can always I always welcome messages from folks that have read my stuff. I actually got like a really sweet message from someone the other day saying they read one of my poems in a collection and it really like stuck with them. And I'm like, please keep it coming. It feels, it feels my Leo rising. Give it to me. So you can find me on TikTok at magenta_menace. Message me there. I'm on Facebook too. You can just like search my name. I accept friend requests from people who will just be like, hey, like I'm interested in the work you do. Like in this community of horror, the Halloween people, we tend to be so friendly to each other and are willing to like accept like camaraderie from each other. So don't feel like I'm scary to reach out to. I promise I'm not intimidating. So those are like the avenues where folks can find me.
All right, that's great. Yeah, I'll have to write that link down for later so I'll put it in the description for anybody who wants to check out some Carina's work. Lastly, what have you read or watched recently that is not shitty? Something that's good.
Yes. Just a few days ago, I watched the new film In a Violent Nature. And it was, it's a like a slasher film, but it's like a slow atmospheric slasher told from the perspective of the killer and has hardly any dialogue in it. And it had the most brutal, grotesque slasher scene I have ever seen in my life. And I had to pause my computer and like kind of stare at the wall for a little bit because I was recoiling. And there's a lot that takes for me to like be recoiling and cringing
Yeah,
and
you did
wincing.
mention a Serbian film earlier. That's one I'm scared to watch. So
Yeah. So yeah, so but it was just so atmospheric, shot really beautifully in like the woods of Canada, like very quiet, very like just
okay,
very
yeah.
calm for most of the film, because we're just following this guy like walking through the woods and just like completely like destroying this like group of people who are just like camping in the woods.
Wow.
And it was shot beautifully, audio was fantastic, gore was impeccable. Like if you like a lot of plot, this is not for you. This is definitely for more of like the art house bitches. Like if you just like watching a film and consuming it as art,
Yeah.
as opposed to a story. So if you like a lot of action, this might not be for you. But if you can like you can sit down and be like, you know, I'm gonna sit and just like consume this media and like take it for all that it is. And I don't really need to be like super entertained by it. But I can just like kind of look at it like I would look at a painting or something. This is
Yeah. It
definitely
seems
one
more
that I
like
would recommend.
yeah, it seems more like an exploration of a concept than anything
Yes.
else. Yeah, I love that sort of stuff. That was going to be my thing that I brought up for something good that I engaged with this week. Is I watched this. I feel so pretentious when I talk about my watching habits, but I promise it's not me trying to be like, oh, you know, I hate the mainstream or whatever. I don't know. I go down rabbit holes and I find weird shit. But I found this one that was a 1983 Estonian grotesque film called Hell. I mean, it's the Estonian word for hell, which I don't know how to pronounce. I'm sorry. But yeah, it was called Hell, and it's this animated film. The animation's like very janky, kind of, you know, Soviet looking. And it's got a lot of lines, you know, like it's very cross-hatched, kind of black and white. And it's essentially, I mean, the way the description would describe it is like a party that turns into an orgy after Satan shows up, but really it's more like it's kind of like this party, and there's all these patrons that are doing this kind of like sinful stuff, and then there's like this sort of battle between good and evil that's represented between the devil, who's kind of playing a trumpet, and these violinists, and then by the end of it, it sort of turns into this like weird, grotesque, like body horror shit, where there are all these like weird transformations into these like
I love that.
I bet you would like it, honestly.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'll send you a link to it. But yeah, it's called Hell, 1983. You can find it on YouTube. It's just really easy to find. But yeah, it's like it kind of, I think it's about 17 minutes long. And if the grotesque stuff is the stuff you're into, you might have to be a little bit patient with it, because the buildup is pretty slow. There's no dialogue in it. There is some, I mean, obviously, clearly religious undertones, but overall, the animation is just, it's so interesting to see like a capture of something that's like way back in time. You know, it's like, what, 60 years ago now? 40 years ago? 80s was 40 years ago, right? I'm terrible at math.
Yes.
Yes. But yeah. So it's interesting to see stuff that like we still see now having been done 40 years ago. You'd think at the time people were more conservative, especially in Estonia, but no, people were doing grotesque body horror shit way back in the day. They always have been.
Definitely.
Yeah. So it's interesting to see something that's very clearly from another time, but still appeals to a modern audience, kind of timeless in that regard. So very cool. If you like watching just trippy, weird stuff like I do, definitely check it out.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, that was a good episode. We had a big long powwow, but it was like a good one, you know?
Yes. Yeah. No, really, really. I think that we needed to dedicate that volume of time to the nightmare that is Death Note 2017.
Yeah. Well, terrible experience. Definitely. I mean, first of all, don't watch it. For the love of God, don't watch it. But if you do, make sure you have friends with you and some form of inebriation. Or something, something to get you to cringe. So, yeah, I think that's the end. We're gonna go ahead and stop recording, I guess. I always forget how Desiree ends these. Yeah. But thank you for listening, and thank you, Carina, for joining me today. And we will see you all next time.